The city of Paris is terrorized by werewolves who are looking for their followers. People are gathered and will be made part of them, including this young man. He must stop the werewolves' action so that the city of Paris is safe from their terror. At the beginning of the film, there is a man running scared in the rain. He just got out of the Paris street gutter. He needs help from the taxi driver there. Unfortunately, the man was caught. These three young men are Andy, Brad, and Chris. They are traveling from America to Paris for a vacation. Andy is the most nerdy of them, especially when it comes to women. Even Chris and Brad are sure that Andy will not be able to get a woman when they arrive in Paris. Yes, even though it was just a joke, but it made Andy a little offended and wanted to prove it to his two friends. It seems like the three of them are thugs. They have arrived in Paris and secretly climbed the Eiffel Tower from the guard. Although he looks the weakest, but it turns out that Andy is the fastest to arrive because his stamina is strong. When he arrives at the top of the tower, Andy sees a beautiful view of the city of Paris. Andy then made a calculation note in his notebook, and who knows what for, while Brad and Chris enjoyed the night drinking. Brad called Andy several times to join, but it turned out that Andy was preparing to do an action that could be considered a bit crazy. It seemed like Andy was going to jump from the Eiffel Tower. Brad tried to prevent him, but Andy still wanted to do this. Not long after, there was a voice of someone coming. They thought it was the tower guard, but it turned out that a beautiful woman wanted to end her life by jumping from the tower. Andy tried to convince the woman to change her mind. After throwing the paper, the woman jumped until Andy tried to catch her. Miraculously, Andy managed to save the woman with the help of Chris and Brad, but the woman then ran away while Andy hit the iron until he was rushed to the hospital. The woman only left her shoes, even though Andy wanted to get to know the woman better. Andy seemed to fall in love and he needed the woman's address. Chris and Brad helped him find the paper thrown by the woman. Maybe that way they could find the woman's address. While Andy, who was in the hospital, saw the woman there, to convince him, Andy tried to go to her. But unfortunately again, Andy lost her trail. Luckily, Brad and Chris managed to get the paper and the woman's address. The next day, they went to the address and met the woman named Seraphine, but it seemed Seraphine didn't want to be disturbed. When returning her shoes, Andy saw Seraphine's hands covered in blood. Andy tried to offer her help again, but Seraphine didn't want to, and Andy kept forcing. In the end, Seraphine asked Andy to meet the next day at a plaza. When they met, Andy asked if Seraphine was allowed by her parents to meet him. Seraphine said that her father and mother had died. Andy accidentally caused trouble with the visitors there. The condom given by Braden and Chris was known by Seraphine. Andy tried to lie that it was a balloon, but the safety flew and went into the visitors' drink until it became a problem. Andy, Brad, and Chris couldn't stop it, but Seraphine could. Even though her body is small, but Seraphine easily gets rid of the big man. How did Seraphine do it? Andy wonders. Seraphine wants to get away from Andy because it is dangerous for her, but because of Andy's persistence, Seraphine becomes confused. One night, Andy and his friends come back to Seraphine, but what comes out is a man named Claude. Not his brother, but his guard. Does Andy have a rival? Claude said Seraphine was not at home, but Claude gave an invitation to Andy and his friends to come to a midnight event during the full moon. Claude said that Seraphine would also come, but it seems Claude lied. They did not find Seraphine there. So Chris tried to go to Seraphine's house and look for her. Chris found something strange there, like someone who needed help. Through a small entrance, Chris saw Seraphine locked up and she needed help. Seraphine said that Andy and Brad were in danger. Chris freed Seraphine, but Seraphine did not want Chris to come with him because it was dangerous. Finally, Chris was put in the cage, while Seraphine tried to prevent Andy and Brad from getting into more serious trouble. Seraphine managed to find Andy there, but Brad was nowhere to be seen. So Seraphine took Andy away, but their actions were caught by Claude and his friends. Seraphine asked Andy to go away because Seraphine seemed like she was going to turn into something terrible. And sure enough, Seraphine turned into a werewolf when she saw the full moon. There was chaos there, while on the other hand, Chris managed to escape from the cage. He saw someone who seemed to be an experiment. Luckily, Chris was still able to escape, while Brad, who was lost, was confused about which way to go. Then he saw a pair of scary eyes looking at him. It turned out that it was Seraphine who turned into a werewolf. Brad became a victim of Seraphine's ferocity. On the other hand, Andy was also terrorized by the werewolf. Luckily, Andy was also able to escape from the werewolf after stabbing his left shoulder with a spear. But when he was about to get out of the hole, Andy's leg was bitten by the werewolf until he fainted. When Andy woke up, he was at Seraphine's house. When he woke up, Andy saw Chris inviting him to escape from there. However, Seraphine asked Andy to rest and drink the red juice that Seraphine had made. Andy didn't remember anything last night and he wanted to leave. But Seraphine blocked him while taking off her clothes. But the longer he was there, Andy felt strange things. Moreover, Andy saw a living corpse, which turned out to be Seraphine's mother. Andy jumped out of the window and ran away, while Chris was caught by Claude. Andy went to the location last night. There he saw many victims whose hearts were missing. He also saw Brad's body. This was really sad. Andy was asked for information from the police. Andy said he saw a werewolf. But Andy was considered insane and like someone who used drugs. Andy was released temporarily, but he was watched by police spies. Andy's behavior looked even stranger, especially when he saw a beautiful woman enter the restaurant. As if she wanted to eat him, in the restaurant Andy was surprised to see Brad's ghost asking for help. Brad was still wandering around. He needed Andy to free him from this. The way Andy had to kill the werewolf who attacked Brad. And in fact, it turned out that Andy had also been bitten until now he was a werewolf. It was just a matter of time before he changed. That night, Andy and the woman in yellow went to the cemetery complex. Maybe they wanted to do something. But that night there was a full moon and Andy turned into a werewolf. Andy killed the woman in yellow, and it turned out that the police spy who was following Andy also became his victim. Now there are two ghosts asking for help from Andy, but the yellow woman wants Andy to die because Andy killed her. Andy has to face other problems. Besides the police, he also has to face Claude and his friends. Andy is taken to Claude's headquarters. The point is Claude wants to find as many followers as possible. But Andy is a mistake. Andy should not be a part of them. Andy must be willing to be a part of them, otherwise Chris will be the next victim. Andy must kill Chris, but Andy can't and decides to fight them. Outnumbered Andy is lucky to be helped by Seraphine. They enter a secret passage to the basement of Seraphine's house. Here Seraphine tells everything including what happened to Andy, but Seraphine might have an antidote. Seraphine's stepfather is a man who at the beginning of the film is still alive. He had become a werewolf, but his stepfather developed an antidote. It seems to work, but they have to wait for Seraphine's stepfather to wake up and ask for the cure. But unfortunately, Seraphine's house is attacked by Claude and his friends. Even Seraphine's stepfather became a victim. He was not saved. But they still have another way to release the werewolf curse. Claude and his friends will hold a big party in an old church. All the people have gathered. Andy and Seraphine try to prevent Claude and take the serum that Claude uses to turn into a werewolf. With the serum, they can become werewolves without the help of the full moon. In the end, there was chaos. There even the police came. Andy managed to kill one of the werewolves, and Brad was finally freed. It turned out that it wasn't Seraphine who killed Brad. Now Claude was their target. Seraphine turned into a werewolf and fought with Claude. Unfortunately, Andy shot the wrong one. He shot Seraphine instead, but Seraphine was still able to survive. Andy is now the only hope, and in the end he managed to eat Claude's heart. A few months later, Andy and Seraphine decided to get married on the Statue of Liberty Tower. Their rings fell, and they both jumped to get them, until they officially became husband and wife.